Hi everyone, it's Rebecca. I'm your instructor tonight. If you are still setting up, go ahead and fill your water cup, of course, with water, and lay down your paper underneath your whole station. And of course, lay out, and I'm just reaching to show you guys supplies, lay out your paper towels so that you can easily just tap off on them. I usually put those in front of my water cup so I can easily just kind of put any dribbles there. Make sure you've got your fancy apron on and ready to go. My mixing plate, this is also where I'll store my paint as I'm going. You've got these cups that are full of your paint. Scoop up from them onto your plate. Whenever you need paint, just scoop them up on here. I've got mine all dispensed out on my plate. It's a little bit of a mess on mine, so you guys can slowly add to your plates as you need it. Just when you're scooping up paint from those cups, try to use a clean brush when you're doing it so that you don't dirty up that whole cup of paint with a dirty brush. So just use clean brushes when you're doing that. Make sure you've got all your paintbrushes pulled out and ready to go. We're going to start with our biggest one, and we're going to cover the canvas. So generally speaking, as we're going, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that any brushes that have been used, my brushes look a little different than yours. These are been used a million times probably. So once you are taking a break from a brush, just make sure that you put it into your water cup to keep it from drying out. And then you can always pull out and dry it off and use it again, but just make sure you're not ever leaving your brushes out. That's kind of the number one thing that'll keep those supplies ready for you to use. And when we are mixing paint, you're always going to pull from the edge of the pile of your paint to create a new kind of pile for you to stir into while you are making new colors. So keep that in mind as general rules for how to do things. I'll show you everything as I'm going, of course, step by step. I'll break it down and I'll draw some things on the board for you. But for right now, what we want to do is kick off this painting by covering the entire background of the painting. So I'll tell you a couple colors to mix to do the backdrop for where the flowers are. So we'll do a kind of this huge mishmash of colors back here that are going to go about halfway down the canvas. If you've got a smaller canvas that you're working on, then you'll just go about halfway down with those. And it is going to be just kind of a mishmash of red, orange, and purple. And if you want to imagine any other colors that you're going to want to use, like pink or anything like that, we're just going to create this kind of just big confetti colors all over the top, and on top of that is where we'll carve out our flowers. So it's going to look a little bit like a hot mess, and that's exactly what we're going for. And then as that's kind of drying out, we'll come down here and we'll fill up that kind of green, grayish sort of color that fills up the rest of the canvas. So we're just going to make a hot mess first, and then we'll carve out all of our pretty flowers on top of it. So a couple color mixtures that we'll do, and I'll give you this straight off the bat. One thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you pause the video as often as you need. So I'm going to be painting pretty quickly. I generally do anyway, but for this, I'm not going to take the breaks that I would give you if you were in the room. So you need to give yourself those breaks by just pushing the pause button and rewind and fast forward however much you need. It's totally up to you to just kind of pace yourself, take as many breaks as you need, feel comfortable, and take your time. I'm just going to go through it so everything's really concise and that you know kind of every step to go without needing to wait for me. So I'm going to mix a few things on my palette, and then I'm going to fill in the top of the canvas with purples, reds, and oranges, just generally speaking. Now this is where you can already start to go off the beaten path and create colors that you want and want to see on your canvas. So orange is going to be, of course, yellow and a little tiny bit of red. So mostly yellow, a little bit of red, and definitely some white. And then purple is going to be, I tend to go with more red and little bits of blue, and then also some white. So those are really going to be the ones that we are mixing the most. And then I'll go in with some pure red if you want to pick up some greens or some yellows, whatever you want to do. You can do multiple shades of orange as well. And I'm just going to kind of create this whole really kind of mess of colors. Once I go down to my palette, I'll pick up a new shade and we'll just kind of bounce around and create that. Now, I'll explain it to death, but showing you is really the best way. So if you guys want to wait and kind of see how I do this first, that's a great way to do it. It's just kind of, when I say right of colors, sometimes seeing it happen in front of you makes a lot more sense than my words. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my orange. I'll try to show you some of this, but generally I want you to also create oranges and purples and things that you want, so I'll only show you so much. But right off the bat, I'm going to create that separate pile like I talked about. I'm going to pull from the edge of my yellow. And I might change this color as I go, but for right now, I'm just going to create some basic colors to be able to dip right into, because I want to paint while this is all still wet, and I want to be painting wet into wet so my colors blend. So I'm going to be going a little bit quickly, which is why I encourage you to maybe watch this all go through first, or just mix with me and paint alongside and see what you create. Alright, so I've got just kind of a basic pale orange. You can always add more red to make it more orange. For my purples, I always like them to be a little bit warm, so a little bit more yellow in them. So I'm not even going to clean up my brush, I just wiped it off with my paper towel. I'm going to pick up some of my red, put it near my blue. I'm going to push those together. Little bits of that blue at a time. I tend for purples that go a little bit more towards that red side. And you can see I've put all of the paint on my plate to begin with, so they can start running into each other. So slowly add your paints to your palette, and that'll help save you from certain disaster. All right, so that's what that'll avoid, is that like the green going into the blue. But hey, maybe we'll make some new interesting colors that way later. All right, so I've got just a basic purple, an orange, and then I'll just go in with kind of solid colors all by themselves. So I'll start with just that purple because that's what's on my brush. I'm going to just try to not be careful with it and create kind of a patch, which eventually will have a little bit of a flower on top of it. So I kind of want just big groupings of this color. I've picked up a little bit of yellow and whatever that purple was left on my brush, and I'm just trying not to be careful with my colors too much. I'm just creating a big group of purples here, and while it's on my brush, I'm just going to try to empty it out like that. And then I'll wipe off my brush. If you're switching now to an orange and you want it to be orange, just go ahead and clean out your brush by swishing it in your water. Wipe it off in your paper towel first, and then swish it out in your water. And I'm going to go into my orange. I'm going to start bringing that in up here. And this orange and this purple actually mix really nicely together. So I'm just going to kind of blend them at their edges just a little bit by crossing and kind of just making these messy brush strokes. A lot of this is going to get covered up as we go. Generally, though, you kind of want, if you put orange in one place, you kind of want to give it another little area to live. And you want this to go about halfway down your canvas. Don't worry too much about how these lines end down here, how the edges will add to that as we go. Pick up some pure red, work that in. And of course, that blends beautifully with purple and with yellow, so don't worry if they run into each other. Just kind of push them in and let them pick up that new color and blend in. All right, pick up some blue. Now we don't want it to necessarily be super dark back there, so we still want our colors to have a little bit of white in them. Now if you do a very dark background, you'll just have a little bit more of a dramatic contrast later, which is totally fine. So just decide kind of what you're looking for. If you want to go into some pink, just a little bit of white and red. That's a great way to kind of finish off maybe these corners. And you're just looking to get rid of now, with whatever colors you've got, just get rid of the white of the canvas. Now here's where, of course, you can split off and do blues or greens and or any color that you can imagine. So start experimenting, have fun, and just know that you don't have to stick with whatever colors I have up here. Now I'm going to make sure it's wet down towards the bottom of this area. And then what I'll do is kind of rinse out my brush lightly. And while this is still wet, I want to transition down into my bottom half of my canvas for that background that'll be around the vase later. And I want it to blend just a little bit with that purple, just so it's not as hard of a line between those colors. So I'll take some white. It's going to be mostly white. Take some white, a little bit of my turquoise, or whatever color you'd like to add, and a touch of my black. The black goes really far really quickly, so I just want it to be still a very pale gray, and it will dry a little bit darker also, so just add little bits of black. You can always darken it after it gets on there. All right, I'm going to start right underneath my colors up above. And once I run into them, I'm just going to slowly brush halfway into my colors and halfway down below, or kind of cross hatch into both of those colors until I just kind of soften out that edge. And then it'll just give a nice transition down into my background. I just want it to be a soft kind of glow going down. I'm going to pick up a little bit, maybe more blue. You can also darken it with a little bit more gray. And really, however you would like now to bring your color down if you want it more blue or more gray. Just start adding those colors and just kind of create some messy kind of brush strokes that give some good texture. If you want it really, really smooth, just keep brushing until the colors all marry together. If you want it to be really textured, just brush one time in maybe a swirly pattern or cross hatching, and then leave it alone. The more you brush it, the more it'll blend. Just keep that in mind. Now, when it gets a little bit dark, like maybe over the left-hand side it got a little bit dark over here, all you have to do is pull from the edge of your white pile, brush into this while it's still wet, and you'll see it kind of create this glowy effect. I like to leave a little bit of my darker colors around the edge, and that gives it a nice border. But whatever you kind of are liking the look of, anything that I say up here as far as rules or directions, they're all rules meant to be broken. That's how the art works, is that you want to create something completely your own. So if you don't like what I'm doing, or if you want to try something completely new, I challenge you to do that. I want to see what you create. All right. It's really hard, I'll tell you right now, it's really hard to leave that top part alone. I know I definitely dove down to the bottom before is comfortable. I did that also to myself, because at this point we're not even painting anything real up top, and so it's really hard to know when to leave it alone. Even the bottom area down here is really hard to kind of recognize when it's ready, but your first goal is to get rid of all of the white of the canvas. Use whatever colors you've already mixed. You can always add more on top, but just once you've got the whole thing filled up, then you can really address it and say that you want more or less of something, and you can just blend that right in. So don't get too attached to trying to make that first layer perfect, because we're going to cover up a lot of it. What comes next is what is the real design and pattern. All right, so I'm just going in and I'm adding a little bit darker around the edges. I always like something with a little bit more of a kind of natural border to it. So I'm picking up some of my turquoise and my gray, and then whatever's left on my brush, probably a little bit of white in there. And while it's still wet, I'm just gonna go quickly in there and create just a little bit of that border. And then before I even am comfortable leaving it alone, I've gotta leave it alone. And then also as it dries, it's gonna become impossible to keep blending it. And then it'll just start getting sticky, and you'll start picking up paint rather than blending into it. So we want to let it dry. Even if we decide later that we want to come back to it, it's always a good idea to let it dry out first. And then your next layer of paint will go right on top once it's dry. And then you can just put on pure color. All right? Cool, cool. So I'm just going to wipe off the extra paint on my paper towel and put my brush in my water. And I'm going to do a quick blow dry break so I can jump right into the next bit for you. So this is a good break for you guys to definitely pause while I am blow drying, but I'll mute my mic so that I don't make a lot of noise in your ears. All right, so what we're gonna do now is create, of course, I'm gonna first carve out the vase, the edges of the vase. And then what we'll do is, while that's kind of drying, we'll start in on our flowers up above. Now, for the vase, though, the interior of it, we want to add little bits of the color from our flowers into the vase. These little bits of stems or reflections coming down. So if you remember to, take some of your colors once you've mixed them from up above and kind of put them inside the vase. So what we'll do now is mix a light gray. Take your medium brush. Your large one should sit in your water and just kind of stay there for a second. Take your medium brush, whatever that may be. And we want it to be almost black, so I'm just going to pick up a little bit of my black. We don't need a ton of this color to begin with. I'm going to put it near my white and pull in a little bit of that white till it's just a very dark steel gray. If you want to add another color to it, like a green or a blue or anything, go for it. And this is just going to be the outline of the vase. But this tells us where our flowers kind of need to sit, kind of where the stems eventually, of course, will be. Now, you do not, of course, need to paint a straight edge to your vase. You can do it any shape that you want to. I'm going to go about maybe a fifth of the way into the canvas at the most, or about 3 or 4 fingers in from the left-hand side. I want to give myself a little bit of room, but I definitely want it to be off-center to give a nice balance to the painting. So just off-center in some way, so about 3 fingers in from the left is a good place to start. And I want this gray to go up to about where that transition is. Don't worry about trying to make it even a solid line. You can make it different width kind of going up if you need to. You can turn your brush on its side and create a little thick line. So don't feel like it has to be solid or even a perfect line. I've kind of messed mine up and used a little bit of kind of scuffy brush marks just so it's not too bold. Now the reason I do that is just so that my flowers are really the bold thing. I don't want my vase to have too hard of a line. Otherwise it'll just really look really hard next to the flowers. I want it to be a little bit soft. So I'm just kind of messily doing some brush strokes. Just a little bit of paint, not much, and leave a lot of it just kind of messy and rough. So I'll go in and just kind of add a little bit of shading in there. Most of what you'll see later on is all of the stems and everything inside, but this is just going to give us a nice little wall just to know where they're going to be added in later on. All right, now we kind of know if we want to add one main flower on top, now we kind of know where it's going to sit on top of. So this gives us a place for all of that to come from. All right, so I'm going to clean out that brush. And that's what I'll use to pretty much paint all of my flowers. We'll add all of the leaves and stems and everything like that on top, but we want to do all of our flowers first. So generally for the flowers, what we want to be doing is mixing colors that are a paler version of whatever they're sitting on top of. So we've kind of created some places for our flowers to sit. So right here, this is an orangey area right here. And so what I'll do is I'll create either a bright yellow or a bright orange or even a pink to go on top of it. And that's kind of what I want. I want right now to use these as my shadows, and then everything that sits on top is going to be the highlights that carve on top and really define the shape. So generally speaking, where you're looking, we want just a brighter version of that color. Now that also being said does not mean or define that you have to use the corresponding color with those sections. So say you're using this area with orange, something that looks beautiful on top of an orange is a blue color. So that might sound a little bit like they would do battle with each other, but technically that's actually how you paint things. Is their shadows are always the opposite of a cool or a warm color. Not to get too detailed or tedious with you, but when it comes down to it, you don't have to be strict with what it's sitting on top of. You could start playing around with the colors and seeing what a turquoise on top of a purple looks like. I tell you, the first time you try it, you'll get immediately addicted to it. So turquoise on top of purple is stunning. Pink on top of red or orange on top of red is gorgeous. So things like that. So you can take a second and mix some of your colors. Make sure you just add more white than you think and just try them out on different areas. So for the main flowers, it's actually fewer than you think, and then we've got a couple tricks to fill up the other areas around it. But you don't really want more than 5, 6, maybe 7 main large flowers. So you don't want to really try to fill this all up with a huge bouquet. What we're going to do is pick maybe 5 main areas where we're going to put flowers right over here. And then in between, we'll just take some of those same colors and create little faux flowers in between. I'll show you how to do that once we get there. So keep in mind the main flower mixtures that we've done so far are oranges, just with more white now, so that's yellow and red to make orange, just add more white. If you want to try just yellow, it's yellow and white. We're always going to add some white to it to make it brighter. For the yellow, I always like to add a tiny touch of red, so it's not too bright of a yellow. It really warms it up and makes it more of, not quite salmony, but just a really pretty bright yellow still with just a touch of red. Pink, of course, is going to be red and white. I like to add a little bit of yellow to that as well, just again to warm it up. And then purple, blue, red, white. And then if you want to do that turquoise, white to that turquoise just by itself is gorgeous. And then very soon we'll start making some greens, but that's generally the ones to go with for replicating the original one. That being said, you guys can again deviate from the plan. So I'll stick with those colors, but if you guys want all fall colors, just do different families of reds and oranges and things like that. And if you want a whole bouquet of purple flowers, just go for it. Totally up to you. So the general shape for what we're going to be doing, I'll kind of break it down on the board, and what I want to challenge you to do is create this same drawing on your paper in front of you as a practice, just to kind of get the rhythm in your hand of what this looks like. So duplicate this drawing, even take some paper and pencil and do it, and then I'll have you do a messy version next to it. So maybe clear off your paper real quick, use a corner that's maybe not being used at this point. And with your brush, pick a color or pick maybe the one that you have the largest pile of. And you're going to do a neat and tidy version of this kind of corresponding shapes and overlapping lines. They do run into each other. They are neat and tidy. But generally we've got, this is the flower shape. So it's these half crisscrossing C's going to and fro around that core. So we pick the center of our flower where we want that to be, and we just create these spiraling C's that start to overlap and fill in that place. That's going to be our flower shape. Do this sketch on paper, that neat and tidy, with your brush, and just keep in mind that, let me see if I can show it to the camera. When you have the center, this might be not super helpful. Let's see how close I can get to the camera. So when you have the center of your flower, what you really want is your brush to spiral around the center. I'm not going to keep it like this and try to brush it all in this one direction. I'm going to have the brush spin and spiral with that shape. Is that something that's clear on the camera? Okay. So if you were to imagine, even take this and visualize it, put it on your, maybe a clean one, or something round like that, take a pen and put that inside, spiral around, especially on your paper for your practice, take your brush and spiral. So the next one that's not as neat and tidy, which is really the brush work that's going to be way more important. Really the same kind of shape and behavior, but we want to smush. And I don't know if I can really draw it. I'm going to do it more on my painting to show you, but we really want to smush our brush and take the pressure in the corner of those bristles, and around, say, this dot, we're going to have these kind of spiral effects where we're really curving and letting our brush do the work. Of course, with paint and everything where we've got the smush, we really want to take advantage of the fact that it's going to leave random and very distinctive brush strokes. It's all about the variety. It's all about the fact that we start with little curves in the center, and then we change it up, and we change the direction of our brush, and we curve around that center and create just a spiral, but it's not a complete spiral. Each one of those petals is going to be just a single brush stroke. So you're describing every single brush stroke as a petal. Every brush stroke is going to be significant. So fewer is better, but also if you look at the original, look at that photo that you have, you'll see that, especially like in maybe that pink or that purple one down at the bottom, the colors aren't necessarily that consistent. Some of the pink has a little bit more white or less white than the others, so know that you can build up and do more layering, but don't completely cover up your background. Leave that as your shadow beneath. So again, a lot of words, better to see it in action. But do your practice runs on your paper first. Get that, just your hand kind of recognizing what the motion's going to be, and that's going to give you the ability to really kind of chase that same shape with a brush when it comes down to it. So it's all about practice. I'm going to start with let's go into my dark area so you can really see the contrast. So I'm going to go into my previous purple. I'm going to scoop up some more white. And it's kind of a lavendery color. With a little bit of yellow and red and make some mud. All right. Take your time mixing your colors. Make sure it's something that you like. I say that as I make a disaster myself. Alright, so we've got something a little bit more like pinky. Let's try it. Alright, I've got a bright color. I'm going to go right in the center here. So what I've got is I'll decide that my center of my flower is right there. And I'll start by spinning my brush. And I want you to be way more loosey than this. But I'm kind of pushing down, smushing, spinning my brush, and then kind of lifting it off. Letting them overlap sometimes and also just not be super close other times. And then just start spiraling around. Pick up a little bit extra white every once in a while if you want, and layer on top of that. And just kind of build this shape, knowing that you can revisit it at any time and put more layers or a different color on top. So make sure there's also, as you're going out to the edges, longer petals. So they're not all just the same exact short ones that you start out with. They do get longer as they go out towards those edges. So your flowers will turn out better the more you do, of course, but also the less time you are taking your time. The more messy you are, the better the flowers will look. So mine looks a little bit neat and tidy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of fly ahead and start painting more. Take your time watching or practicing on the paper in front of you. And I'm going to go with a bright yellow and start making more flowers. So my favorite part of teaching this painting is the fact that by the end, everyone has completely different colors to their flowers, completely different layering, and that's something I just love to see. So don't feel like you have to match mine. The best part of this one, especially with all the flowers and everything, is just kind of going off on your own and creating whatever you want. So once you have a flower color, it's good to go somewhere else on your canvas and visit with that same color as well. Maybe make a little rose or a little any shaped flower that you want in another area, and just make sure you don't just keep it all to one corner. If you're not sure about a color, just try it on your canvas. You can always cover it up. I tend to not necessarily make mine bright enough the first time. So I'm using the medium-sized brush, if I forgot to say that. Using the medium-sized brush. Always use the biggest brush possible for anything. And I'll give you better brush strokes. And go as quickly as possible, knowing that you can build more layers on top if you need to. But trying to figure out if something is balanced, you can't figure out if a painting looks finished if you've only been working on one flower at a time. Your painting will never look finished. You might not know that one of your flowers is actually done a while back if it doesn't have a neighbor. So make sure that you keep moving through your painting and getting them built up. I always create a completely different painting every time I do this. I never create the same colors, whether on purpose or not. It's always interesting to see what happens on my palette too. I'm gonna put some turquoise in there just for funsies. This turquoise also makes a beautiful purple if you want to put some of that red in there rather than using the other blue. Makes a great purple. And then visit one more area with it. Alright, what I'm going to do now, I've got my main large flowers. It's really hard to know when to stop, so I'm just going to let them sit for right now. I can always layer on top a little bit more. But while I've still got my paints wet on my palette, I'm just going to go through. I'm going to start visiting areas of my painting that doesn't have any flowers yet. I'm going to start just putting little dabs of these paints, these paint colors, just a little push of my brush and create kind of what looks somewhat like just single petals. Kind of filling up an area, maybe a couple brush strokes, a spiral, but leaving it very empty. I'm not going to do specific flowers. I want to just kind of fill it up and make it look like the bouquet really goes back there and fills up the rest of the painting. So I'm not going to be too particular. I just want to get more texture up there. Leave a lot of space in between. You already put a lot of color up there. So you don't need to do anything too fancy. But I want to just get a little bit of color in between and create just kind of that look that does continue. Now, right down here is where a bunch of leaves will happen, but I'm going to get a little bit of a transition so that we really do make it look like there's a little bit more filling in the bouquet there. So if you are still on your first couple of flowers, definitely push pause if you haven't done so already. Don't feel rushed, just take your time. Alright, just a couple more little dots of color in between, and then we'll be ready for the leaves and everything on top. Okay, Alright, so I'm going to leave that there. It does not look finished, but that is okay. I can always layer more on top of the flowers or just see what happens after I add the rest of the details. So, like I mentioned before, adding a little bit of your colors, your flower colors into the vase. I'm going to take a little bit of my orange just while I'm remembering. A little bit of my orange, a couple little brush strokes of my yellow and orange, and a couple brush strokes of my purple. I'll just get a little bit in there. It just look a little bit more like there's a reflection from your other colors. It'll bring some of that happy yellow and everything down into the bottom of your painting. And now if you wanted to, you can go back and revisit some of your first flowers and add some highlighting if you wanted to. So you can take your time and go back now. And some of your first ones are a little bit more dry, so they'll take some of those highlights a little bit better. So you can revisit now, or you can just kind of give it a minute and come back in a little while. Alright, so this other one's dry over here, so I'm going to do a couple more touches. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is do a quick blow dry just to make sure I don't drag any of those flower colors into the leaves and everything. So now go ahead and finish up what you're doing, and I'll be back in a second. So take your time again on those flowers, mix your colors. Another one, I didn't use actually yellow to go back in and kind of brighten up those in-between areas, but if you look on the original one, it's really fun. I'm just going to go ahead and do it now because it's dry. And with that bright yellow, you don't want to drag necessarily any of the other colors in, but I'm going to take some of my white and some yellow, and this really brightens it up. And just, if you look in the photo, it's a little bit more clear, but just kind of going in between and creating these little pops of color that'll look a little bit messy when you first do them, but that's okay once you do the leaves and everything else around them. Just creating it look like there's little bits of confetti of bright color, orange and yellow, popping in between. And now that nothing else is wet, it won't mix in. It'll just sit right on top and just create those little pops of color. That'll do a lot to brighten up yours. If you didn't go with bright colors to begin with, like I didn't, you can go back in and add whatever you need to in between. All right. So what we're going to do now is create those stems for our leaves to sit on top of or attach to. So we'll take our medium-sized brush and we're going to create our stems first. We're going to take some of that color and go down into our vase and create some of the dark shadows in there, but then we'll mix our green and we'll create our leaves to go on top. So I'll take that medium brush. I like this medium brush, the one with the flat edge. I like this to draw lines better. This is the one. So I like this to draw lines because this creates a cleaner, thinner line. I was trying to say both those things at the same time and that was a mess. Cleaner, thinner line just by turning this on its side, and it holds more paint than a pointed brush does. So I really use this, and I find this one more successful for me to paint. But if you want to use your pointy brush to try to create thin lines, just go with it. Whatever you find out that you're more comfortable with. So this guy, I'm going to clean it out, and then I'm going to go right into my black, scoop up a little bit of that, and then I'm going to put it next to my green and just kind of mix those together until it just creates still a really, really dark green, almost a black, but it's going to tone it down just a little bit so it's not too harsh of a color. It's going to be a deep, deep forest green. And then once that's loaded up, so I've got still quite dark, but it's definitely a greeny color. Once I've got that loaded up, I'm going to press all the extra paint out of it so it goes back to its narrow brush width. It won't have too much paint in there for it to retain its original size. And then my brush is still damp from cleaning it, so I can go right into painting with it. Now, what we'll do is we'll just kind of establish first these that go down into the rest of the painting. Kind of creeps from behind this big main flower, comes down. And when you get to the edge, you just lift off, and that'll get you that tapered look. We're going to put leaves on top of it also, so if you don't get a tapered look that you like, put a leaf on top of it. And then I'm just going to create a couple little pieces that break off for some leaves to sit on top of. You can always add some of those later as well. And mostly people will be seeing the leaves, so you don't have to add every piece for all of the leaves to attach to. We'll just have them sitting out there also without having a stem necessarily if we need to. So a couple pieces that break off here. Don't be afraid. Boldly go. Don't be afraid to go on top of your flowers, in front of them. It's more important that you get these placed correctly than to imagine that they're all just going to be like trying to go around the flowers. You want them to go in front, like they're really filling up the bouquet. Don't be afraid. Cover up your favorite flower. I dare you. See, I've got someone in the crowd gasping. I like it. All right. And then have some of them go off the top. Some of them go in front, layer, and create. You have to create exactly 9 stems. And then I have to tell you that I'm kidding. You do not have to do that. Contractually, I'm obligated to say I was kidding. JK lol. And it's going to look like not even a hot mess. It'll just look like a mess. And that's exactly what we want. See, right? See, if it looks a bit like a disaster zone, you are nailing it. If it looks good, you're probably doing it wrong. Let's start over. Oh, lady, can you bring me more white? Thank you. You guys should get an assistant. You should hire an assistant every time you're painting at home. Thank you. Oh, wave to the camera. Come over here. No. If you're not planning to be on camera, you should definitely not do anything that warrants being on the news then. All right. So for our greens, generally speaking, you can take some white and add it to the green all by itself, the green that you already have, but that's going to create a minty color. Try it out. If you like that color, go with it. If you feel like it really goes well with your flowers, just go with it. I'm going to create a couple different shades of green. One's just going to have more white, and one's going to have just more of my pure colors without white, but they'll both have some white in it. So I'm going to do some green with yellow. That's what turns it into that emeraldy true green, is adding some extra yellow to it. You can also create some really beautiful greens with the yellow, white, and that turquoise color. So just kind of experiment, make some greens that you like. No real necessary specific greens that you have to do for this shape. So for these leaves or anything like that. So really just kind of experiment with that. Just start with white, add a little bit of yellow, and then pull in little bits of your turquoise or green in whatever portions you want. If you've got a pile of, if you don't have much mixing area, you can mix it on top of dry area. On your plate, you can mix on top new colors. I'm saying that because I'm mixing on top of an old orange pile right now. So just keep that in mind. You can always mix on top of old areas. Because we've been mixing some cray-cray colors, and you might be a little low on space. Alright, so I've got my first green. It's my lighter green. It's always going to be more yellow than you think. More yellow than green to make that really bright one. This is my brighter green that I'm starting out with, and then I'll add darker for later. Alright. I'm going to actually finish stirring it, and then I'll go for it. Alright, so I've got my medium-sized brush. And then what I'm going to do is try not to be too careful with my shape. I'll start, that being said, practice on the paper if you want to. I'll start over next to the stem, I'll push harder, and then I'll lift off as I go out to the edge. This is not that dark, so it's kind of hard to see, so let me go on top of one of the flowers. So over here is pretty dark. Alright, so I'm going to either start at the stem or away from it. I'm going to start with that pointed area, and then I'll push down and then lift off as I get towards the stem. And then wave it around, create different directions that those are all going. Don't feel like they all have to go in one direction. You want them to be random just a little bit. If you are more comfortable doing it where you paint them by kind of outlining them first and then filling them in, that's a great way to do it as well. So don't feel like you have to try to do it all in one brush stroke. Alright, I'm going to darken up my color and put more on. So more green, less white. And don't feel like they only can grow from a stem, because they don't have to. They can also just kind of randomly pop out. And if you want bigger ones, you probably can't do it in one brush stroke. But just use whatever brush you find is creating the size that you want. And just create a variety of shapes to these and sizes. Some of them, there should be some baby ones in there somewhere as well. And then we're going to go up into our flowers and create little random ones that are just popping up behind or in front of some of our flowers. They don't all have to come from a stem. And you can also create even a darker one. In the original painting, there's a really dark, almost black green that's really fun to start mixing in. And this one, once I start doing leaves, it's really hard to stop. Like everywhere should get a leaf. So almost like that stem color we had where it's mostly green, a little bit of black, with a really dark leaf if you want to. And that's really fun because it gives this really next level contrast, kind of drama that you wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. Because there's not a lot of dark shadows. Not in mine anyway. If you guys had dark colors from before, then awesome. For me, I didn't have a lot of dark color, so I like to bring it in with some of the leaves. And like I said, it's really hard once I start doing leaves to stop. So I'm going to do one more, two more maybe, and then I've got to stop. If you're starting to ask yourself, where should I put one more? You are already done. All right, but then I want to take all those greens and start doing the stems down below. So I still want to see some of the background through some of these lines. They don't even have to come from any specific flower or anything. I just want to see some of the background still through it, and I just want a lot of shades of green just kind of coming up to the flowers. And then as they come down, they don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the canvas. They can kind of fade and lift off. Just make sure you get some nice dark ones in there too. It's nice to have some contrast. You can even take some black and paint some lines going down. If you need to remix your greens if you didn't have any left over, don't worry about it. They don't have to match the leaves or anything. I'm always surprised at how much just giving the gravity of that vase being filled down below, how much that really does finish. Make it feel a lot more like it's a full canvas. So while that's drying though, I'm gonna go ahead and do the baby's breath. I always love the baby's breath on top of this because it really adds just a little fine detail that gives it a really full feel. Now, if I was really going to finish this to probably where I would want it, I would go back in and I would add a little bit of brighter highlights into my roses, into my flowers. So this is a great time, once you've got the vase filled and everything, once you've got this to this point, this is the perfect time to really now look at your flowers, take a step back from your painting, look at it from a distance, and try to decide if you want to add anything else to your flowers, because once we do the baby's breath, we're really covering up quite a bit of the kind of what we can add to it. So in the original one, say for example, adding some more white highlights. Now that the flowers are dry, you can really start adding more. Now in the original one, there's something like the centers of the flowers have their little different colored dots inside if you want to add those. That's always a fun thing to add. Taking maybe some yellow or some orange and putting those in the center of the flower. It's a great way to finish them. For me, I would brighten these up and add a little bit more brighter white to some of the petals. So just know that that's an option. So any way that you want to add to this, as far as the flowers go, this is a great time to do it before we add too many details on top. And again, take a second and step away from your painting and look at it from a distance to see really where you feel like you want to add something or paint something out. And yeah, take your time on it. Pause it, take some time, see what you create and do, and then we'll add the finishing touches. So I'll go ahead and finish and finalize everything while I'm waiting for that vase to dry the stems before I put the white on top. I'm gonna go up and do the baby's breath. There's a little bit of outlining to some of the leaves that, of course, look really nice in the end if you'd like to add those. I'm just gonna grab my smallest brush, the one we haven't really used yet, very tiniest brush, and I'm just gonna pick up pure white, and I'm really just gonna speckle it in, really messily, in little clumps. It's important to just do clumpings of baby's breath wherever you want to. Just try to make it random. You're gonna go right on top of any of your leaves or petals or anything. I like to kind of focus it, especially if you look in the original painting, I really like to focus it kind of around the center flower first, and then do little clumpings around the other flowers, just little bits everywhere else. But just make sure you do it in clumpings. Just change kind of the pressure of your brush to make sure you get different size flowers. They're not going to look like specifically flowers, but from a distance they really do look, once they're mixing with the rest of the flowers, they really do look like just little clumps of little baby flowers. Now if you want to, you can do some white or black outlines to some of your leaves. Maybe do that division down the center. I'll do it with white because I think it's a little bit clearer to see. But on maybe one of your large leaves, you can do a white outline and then a line down the center, create little highlights in there. Or with black, some of them have black outlines, or a dark green outline. It's nice to add just a little detail, just a few of them, not necessarily all of them. Just while you've got your little brush and a little bit of white on it, you can add some finishing touches to that. And then my vase is almost dry. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of my dark green, doesn't really matter what shade, and I'm going to create a shadow underneath where the top of the water ended. So it's just going to be a horizontal line that goes right over the top of all my other colors. And then I'm just going to kind of keep painting down until I run out of paint on my brush. I didn't pick up a lot to begin with, but just kind of let it naturally fade out just by running out of paint. Now this will only work really if you don't have a lot of paint on your stems, or you'll never run out of paint. I'll just keep picking up new colors the whole way down. And you'll just have all your stems going in the wrong direction. If you need to, if you kind of picked up too much, just take your finger and kind of smudge it out. That's what we'll do with creating the glass later too. We'll kind of smudge out some of that with our finger, just give it that soft kind of blend. All right, so I'm going to do one last blow dry, and then the final touch of the vase, and that will be the final touches. All right, so one thing I noticed on mine though that I'll mention is where like the stems came up to the flower, and I tried to kind of just avoid my orange flower. It still looks like they kind of run into it rather than the flower being in front of it. More looks like they run into it. So I'm just gonna mix some orange, and I want those petals to be in front and on top. So I'm just gonna paint kind of finish of my flower to kind of refresh it on top. So this will be kind of part of just finishing that off. So just know that you can continue to revisit at any time and create more variety on those flowers. Just make sure your green is dry first. But that's a thing that's pretty common because we do the stems after, that you'll want to maybe just do a little bit of pop of. Now I want to make sure that color is elsewhere in my painting. And don't forget that pure white looks great on top of a lot of the flowers too. Especially if it starts to blend in. Okay. All right, now I gotta leave it on. Alright, so now I'm going to clean out my medium-sized brush, and I'm going to use that to do the kind of the glistening off of the glass. I'll make sure my brush is clean, so I'm going to wipe it off a couple times with my paper towel, and then swirl it off at the bottom of your cup. If you need to kind of flush it at the bottom of your cup and kind of flex it against the bottom of that cup a couple times to get all that paint out, that's great. If you want to just run it under some running water at home, go for it. Just get your brush clean because you want this to be pretty pure white. So I'm going to pick up a good amount of white on my brush, and I'm going to start kind of underneath that water line, or kind of right above, a little distance inside my cup, and I'm just going to bring it down the side and lift off and just kind of let it sit there as kind of a soft ending to it, as a little bit of a glow. Maybe add a couple touches of white on the top of the water line here. And then if the lines end up too hard, they don't look soft enough to you, just take your finger and smudge it out. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to use your brush to give a soft line. So then I'll take just kind of the same thing. I'll add just the same brush. I haven't even filled it up again. Take tiny bits of white and kind of adding that glow down the side. If you were to do like a really soft glow, all you do is take a random spot. You don't want to be too careful where it is, just one side, and then just kind of smudge out. And you can see how that makes it transparent like that. That is what gives a really nice mix of glistening and just kind of that soft reflection. I'm going to add a couple little random dashes, maybe coming up from the bottom this time, and then a couple coming up and down, kind of in between the stems as well. Less is more, because we already done so much with the reflection with, or the vase kind of look, just by leaving it transparent and giving this little bit of a water line here. That adds a lot to it. So a few little glowy marks, a few little touches of just bright white, fade it out just a little bit, and you'll have yourself just enough of a reflection to make it really look convincing. So less is more with that. All right, I'll add just a little bit of white, almost bringing back that background in between, and that'll be it. All right. Well, all right, so that's the last touch. Again, revisit your flowers, add as much highlighting as you want if you'd like to, maybe outlining your leaves. There's a lot of finishing touches you can add, more baby's breath or little pieces of color, just like we did with the orange and the yellow in between. That really brightens it up as well. So we would love, love, love to see what you've created at home. Most of the fun is seeing what all of the students create on their own. So if you could send photos, we would love to see them. If you send them to us on Facebook, just go to Uncorked Canvas on Facebook and you just post them to our wall. If you want to email us directly with any feedback that you have, you can just email us directly at info@uncorkedcanvas.com. We're still learning how to do all of this, and we would love to hear what you guys thought, and any feedback that you had. If you had fun, feel free to leave a review on either Facebook or Google or anything like that, and please do post pictures. We want to see you, and if we want to see you also in your creative space, if you guys are around the dining room, take pictures or anything like that. Wherever you are, we'd love to see your creative space and your smiling faces. So thank you so much for painting with me today. We appreciate you guys so much. We really, really appreciate your time spent with us today. We know it's very valuable time, and we really appreciate it. And I hope you guys had fun being creative at home, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your painting. Thank you. Bye.